Can we just take this time to greet one another? Good morning. Good morning and good day as well to everyone who's joining us in our live stream and in Crossroad for our community viewing. Today po is, as we continue with our Strong 22 tune-up, is part 2 of the growth equation that we were talking about the previous week. Tayo po, no, in a very strange way, we are created by God to both have yin and yang. Yung isang konsepto po sa Chinese, which is a symbol of how both there is chaos and order. There's both fire and there's also water. There's also rest while there's also activity. And without one or the other, we will end up broken, di ba? Pag masyadong mabigat yung stress sa pinagdadaanan natin, hindi tayo lumalakas niyan. That's the reason why if you're into fitness and wellness, naintindihan po natin yan. Pag nag-exercise, hindi lumalakas sa exercise. Saan lumalakas? Ayaw nyo? Sa lamon. Lumalakas sa lamon at sa tulog. It's after we exercise that the equation is completed. Pag tayo po ay masyadong nasa exercise, ang tawag dyan overtraining. But, if sumobra tayo sa kabilang equation, yung sa kabilang side ng equation, which is rest, tawag sa atin sa Tagalog, batugan. Diba? So we need to have both so that we understand growth. The growth equation is stress plus rest. Last week we talked about the wilderness and how the wilderness is both a place of disquietude, kung saan po tayo nagkakaroon ng kaguluhan, but it can also be a source of hidden springs of water, ng konting strength and blessing. So, we talked about that last week. Today, we're going to talk about a very, very misunderstood aspect, which is rest. Tayo po sa panahon na ito, we don't necessarily look at rest as something that's positive. Bakit? We are in an economy of growth. Lagi natin iniisip at a certain point, pag bata po tayo, may level up. Diba? Kaya po, when we're kids, nagsisimula po tayo sa preschool, but we don't maintain in preschool. Over time, at a certain age, dapat meron tayong school na iba. At a certain age, dapat mag-graduate tayo. At a certain age, dapat may trabaho na tayo. At a certain age, aabot magpapakasal na po tayo. Kaya there are sometimes that existential crisis na pinagdadaanan po ng mga tao pag hindi po sang-ayon ng kanyang lakbayin sa expectations niya. Right? Ako po, I'm a member of the millennial generation and I'm 31, I'm turning 32 this year. And, you know, ako naaalala ko yung kwento po ng magulang ko. Back in 1989, yung magulang ko nakapagbili po sila ng bahay. At that point, marami na po kami magkakapatid. And we needed a house, hindi na kasya sa apartment. Now, isipin niyo po to. Yung bahay po namin, it was okay in size, no? But kasi 7 kami magkakapatid. 2 magulang, hindi pa binibilang yung aso't pusa. Diba? I think, if I remember correctly, it had 4 rooms, and it had a living room, it had a library, ganon. Maniwala po kayo, tinanong ko yung tatay ko, magkano ang nagastos para dyan? 700,000 pesos. 4 rooms, may lupa, tapos may library at lahat pa. Now, sino ba dito na familiar po kayo sa real estate market? Anyone? Ma'am, yan. Meron. Kung kayo po, makahanap kayo ng bahay na for sale na may 4 na kwarto at 700,000 pesos, di ba? Ang tanong dyan, sino ba kinakailangan ko patayin para mabili yan? Di ba? Sa totoo lang. Ako, yun yung naging problema. Bilang millennial generation, it's always the housing market that's the issue. Kasi syempre, yung mga magulang, minsan, I understand, we're loving and we love our kids and all of that. Pero minsan, hindi natin naintindihan na mga panahon nagbabago. Kaya at a certain age, wala ka pang asawa. Magpakasal ka na, maghanap ka na sa labas, kahit sino na dyan. Di ba? Mamaya, tanong na natin, teka, wala ka pang trabaho? Maghanap ka na kahit basta ganun lang. Yung mga lahat ng kaibigan mo, yan, doktor na, yung isa, ikaw, tambay? Parang, di ba? we end up thinking these ways, and guess what? It doesn't scale, right? Today, if you understand what the real estate economy is, sabi ko nga, yung growth over the past 30, 40 years is 1,000-fold. Whereas ang minimum wage has only grown by about 30%. Kung ang 1,000-fold ang growth ng real estate at ang minimum wage, ganito lang yung akyat, kamusta? Makaipon ka ba para makabili ng bahay at the age of 30? Hindi. That's the reason why many people feel left behind. Yung magulang ko at this point, ganito na. Palagi natin sabi, mas maganda pa buhay mo kaysa buhay ko. Pero, Mami, Daddy, nung panahon mo, kaya nyo i-afford yan, kami hindi na. Kaya ano nangyayari? Nagkakainggitan pa. Bakit? Pag tignan mo na social media, everyone is posting goals. Di ba? So the question becomes, am I doing enough? Right? Am I doing enough for the stage of life that I'm in? And the answer will always be no. Bakit? Pansinin natin, pag bumili tayo, pag may makuha tayo, may ma-achieve tayo, masaya tayo. Correct po ba? But how long will that last? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? After that, nawawala yung kaligayahan. And we're always wanting more. Diba? Sabi natin, noong una, masaya na ako, makabili lang ako ng sarili kong pagkain. Pagkatapos nun, masaya na ako, makabili na ako ng sarili kong damit. Masaya lang ako pag makabili ako ng ganito, ganyan, etc., etc. Hindi natatapos. And it is intrinsically loaded in the very questions we ask. Pansinin po natin, pag magkakilalanan tayo, kilala ba natin katabi natin? So sa mga taong hindi, pag tinanong niyo po yung katabi ninyo, hello, pangalan ko si ganyan, pangalan mo, ano pangalan mo? Anong next question after magkaroon ng introduction ng names? Yan, sa trabaho. So, what do you do for a living? Diba? Parang as if, rinarank natin ang tingin natin sa tao based on what they do. I'm a doctor, ay wow. I'm an engineer, ay wow. Kung yung kausap ba natin, sinabi niya, tambay ako, itutuloy ba natin yung usapan? Hindi, di ba? Paano kung sinabi niya, anong ginagawa mo for a living? Sasabihin niya, palamunin. Tutuloy pa ba natin yung usapan? Madalas hindi, di ba? Bakit? Para po nating kinikilo ang tao, tinitingnan natin na ang value ng tao is based on total output rendered. So we are looking at it on the basis of production as opposed on the basis of humanity. And that, sabi nga po ni Karl Barth, comes from a misconception on what the creation cycle is. Diba? Pag tinignan natin, we are always in this concept of creation. It connects us to our Imago Dei, but in the completion ng ating creation, kailan natapos ang trabaho ng Diyos? Sino po dito natapos ang trabaho ng Diyos after 6 days? Wala. Sino dito nagsasabi after 7 days? Wala. So meron ba 8? O 5? Hindi, sige nga. Sige. Sino dito sabi 6? Okay, ayan. Sino dito sabi 7? Okay. Bakit 7 at hindi 6? Kasi, 7. Diba? Tignan natin ang Bible, no? Sabi po dito in Genesis 2, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all their multitude. Diba? Sabi, after 6 days, natapos ang trabaho ng paggawa. But, sabi as it continues, on the 7th day, God finished the work that He had done, and He rested on the 7th day from all the work that He had done. So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it, God rested from all the work that He had done in creation. So, on the 7th day, what did God do? He rested. So, when was the completion of creation? Was it on the 6th day or on the 7th day? 6. Sabi, Coach, ang labo mo kausap. Keyword, the completion of creation was 6 days. But the completion of God's work was 7. So what happened on the 7th day, and how did it change our relationship with God? Diba? We need to understand what rest is. So first of all, to understand what rest is, let's define what rest is. Okay? Sige. I'm reading from a book called Burnout, written by Emily Nagoski, PhD, and it's called The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. Teka lang po. Okay. Now, dito po, ide-define po niya ang rest. Sabi po niya, Nietzsche told us, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You've been hearing this for years in one form or another, but let's be specific, okay? If you're hit by a car and don't die, does the car make you stronger? Sabihin natin na sagasaan tayo. Lumakas ba tayo? Grabe, hindi nyo sure? Lumakas, hindi. Hindi. Does injury or disease make you stronger? Hindi. Does suffering alone build character? Hindi. These things leave you more vulnerable to further injury. What makes you stronger is whatever happens to you after you survive the thing that didn't kill you. What makes you stronger is rest. Rest is quite simply when you stop using a part of you that's used up, worn out, damaged, or inflamed so that it has a chance to renew itself. Rest is quite simply when you stop using one part of you na gasgas na sobra para meron siyang pagkakataon mag-recover. Right? So when we look at it, what is it that about the story of creation that gives us a connection to rest? And why was it necessary that God continued the work until the 7th day? For us to understand further, allow me to give us a particular glimpse in the book of Exodus. Sabi po sa Exodus chapter 20, the story of the Ten Commandments, in verse 8, sabi, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and the sea and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Dito po, do we remember the story of Exodus? What does Exodus talk about? It is the journey from slavery into freedom. Diba? Ang mga alipin, anong pagkakaiba ng alipin at malaya? Tingnan niyo yung katabi ninyo. Tanong mo siya, malaya ka ba? Pag sabi niya, oo, sabihin mo, paano mo nasabi? O, diba? Paano natin masasabi na malaya na tayo? Is it because kaya natin gawin lahat ng gusto natin? Which is a form of freedom, but it does not mean you're free. It just means you're anarchistic. Ibig sabihin, ikaw yung ruler ng sarili mong mundo. Right? Now, the problem of freedom is that it is not taught. It can only be felt. Right? For example, tayo po, we have so many things that are holding us back. Sa totoo lang, sabi natin, pagdating natin sa adulthood, di ba sabi ng mga magulang natin, huwag mo muna gawin yung mga yan, pagtanda mo na, pagkaya mo na. Pag matanda ka na, kaya mo gawin lahat ng gusto mo gawin. Sino nakarinig nun? Ako kasi palagi ko yung narinig, kasi yung magulang ko, they're disciplinarians. Okay? So kami yung tipong mga pamilya na bawal ang sleepover, bawal lumabas, bawal manood ng sine kasama ng friends, bawal manood ng TV on a school night. Naalala niyo pa yung pakiramdam na yon? Diba? Ngayon kasi parang ang hirap na i-control eh. Sino po ba dito kino-control pa rin yung mga activities ng mga anak nila? Yan. Yan, very nice. Meron pa palang may pag-asa dito. Di ba? Kasi ang bata, hindi naman necessarily alam ng bata kung anong dapat gawin sa buhay niya, di ba? Kung ang bata ang ginawang hari, syempre hindi yan kakain ng healthy. Hindi yan matutulog pag siesta. Hindi yan matutulog na maayos na oras. Alam ka naman mag-aral yan kung mas madali manood ng TV o maglaro. Di ba? So lagi sasabihin ng magulang po sa atin, di ba po, na paghandaan mo lang, tiisin mo lang, pagtanda mo, kaya mo na gawin yan lahat. Okay. Tanong, sino ba dito matanda na? Ba't kayo nahihiya? O, di ba? Ako, matanda na po ako. Tanong, kaya ba natin gawin lahat ng gusto natin gawin? Hindi, di ba? So, tanong, malaya ba talaga tayo? No, bakit? Sometimes, ang mga nagpipigil po sa atin ay yung mga obligasyon at responsibilidad natin. Hindi naman mali po yun. Ang mga obligasyon at responsibilidad po natin, kinakailangan natin punan. Kinakailangan natin ipagpatuloy at labanan. Or ipaglaban. Ang problema lang minsan, hindi natin alam kailan i-distinguish yung dalawa. Hindi po ba? Tanong, dapat ba magpahinga ang tao? Okay. What is the best form of rest that anyone can do? Okay, very nice. At least, marami pong kinikilusan ng Diyos dito. Sleep. What is the right amount of sleep? 8 hours. Liars go to hell. Sino dito 8 hours matulog? Okay. Anyone for 7? 7. Okay. 6. 5. 4. Okay. 3. 2. Sino dito robot di natutulog? Diba? Tinding usapan. Now, if we understand that rest is necessary, sleep is important, why do we not allow ourselves rest? Pansinin natin, palagi tayo may hirit. Coach, kasi may ganito, may ganon. Hindi, naintindihan ko yun. Kaya ako sasabihin, uulit-ulitin ko to sa pagpapatuloy natin ng araw na to. Hindi ko sinasabi magpahinga ka. Ang sinasabi ko, kung hindi ka magpahinga, ang pahinga ang kukuha sa'yo. Lagi tayong may excuse, di ba? Lagi natin sinasabi may kailangan tayo gawin, may kailangan tayong tapusin, hindi natin pwede pagawin yan ngayon, what not, etc., etc. But does that not make us slaves to the activity? As opposed to free people who learn and understand that life is a matter of balance. Diba? The journey to freedom is a long process of continuous growth. And that's the reason why pag tinignan natin, even rest was commanded by God. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. If you look at the Book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah is actually one of the more interesting books of the Bible because it talks about a particular system that is used very much today in startup companies. It's called agile systems. Okay? Agile systems is a way to sort of programize how to solve a task. And one of the leaders of agile systems actually studied the Book of Nehemiah. Kasi paano nagawa yun? In 40 days na ayos mo yung pader ng Israel. Now, sometimes we look at Nehemiah and we focus on the work. Nakakalimutan natin ang Nehemiah 13. Which was what? Pinagalitan ni Nehemiah ang lahat ng tao kasi hindi sila marunong mag-keep ng Sabbath. By definition, Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to cease and desist. Parang police, sasabihin sa'yo, cease and desist. Diba? That's also where we get the word Sabado, na dapat ay panahon ng pahinga, pero sa totoo lang, Anong ginagawa natin sa Sabado? Sabi niya, nagpa-plancha. Okay naman yun. Walang problema yun. Di ba? But sometimes, we go through a Saturday, we cry on a Sunday because Monday is coming. If we're truly rested, then we welcome Monday with open arms. That's what I'm trying to teach today. How do we understand rest from the perspective of the Bible? So pag tinignan natin let's try to understand and define what Sabbath is. Okay? I'll be reading from a book called Wrestling with Rest, which is a book written by a theologian and youth pastor named Nathan Stuckey. Yan. Wrestling with Rest, inviting you to discover the gift of Sabbath. Dito po, pag-uusapan niya ang theology of creation. I'll just read it very lightly to begin the introduction lang. Sabi dito, the vast story of Sabbath contained in Scripture doesn't begin with death. It begins with brand new life in the creation narrative in Genesis. It begins with God's own rest on the seventh day. When Swiss theologian Karl Barth began forming his doctrine of the Sabbath, he too begins in Genesis and grounds his understanding of the Sabbath in his interpretation of the seventh day of creation. We will follow his lead. Barth's exploration of the seventh day of creation comes in the context of his broader interpretation of the entire creation narrative found in Genesis 1, verse 1, 2 to 3. In his interpretation, Barth approaches the broader creation narrative as a pure saga. Saga, ang ibig sabihin niyan, may kinikwento. So ano ang kinikwento? In so doing, Barth attempts to enter the text on his own terms. Its primary purpose is neither scientific nor historical. Right? We do not look at Genesis 1 to understand history or science. It is for us to understand what is going on in this world. Okay? The text stands at the very beginning of the Bible's first book to convey absolutely vital convictions about God, creation, and, nababasa natin, the relationship between the two. Ano ba ang papel ng manlilikha at mga nilikha? Ano ba ang relationship kung man meron? Diba? Minsan kasi nabubuhay po tayo sa isang pamamaraan na parang wala tayong iniinda. Wala pa po tayong iniintindi, akala po natin mag-isa lang tayo sa buhay. Akala po natin na ang buhay na ito ay dog eat dog, na pag tinignan natin, hindi naman talaga tayo parang all in this together. Ako lang mag-isa. Mag-isa lang ako nagbibitbit. Mag-isa lang ako lumalaban at walang ibang nakakaintindi. Now, that forms within us a wrong relationship with creation. That's why sabi nga, ang mga taong hindi marunong magpahinga ay mali ang unawa sa manlilikha at mga nilikha. Bakit? Anong sabi ng Bible tungkol sa pahinga? The wicked will know no rest. Tignan niyo yung katabi ninyo, tanong mo siya, wicked ka ba? Ang mga masasamang tao, hirap makatulog. Sino ba dito kinakailangan uminom ng sleeping pill para makatulog? Sabihin mo, masamang tao ka. It comes from a wrong relationship with creation. Whenever we think about this, work, sabi nga ni Rihanna, wala tayong ginawa kung hindi magtrabaho. Hindi natin naintindihan na meron po tayong actually dapat i-carve out na time para po sa kapahingahan. In fact, a very simple way to understand this and to try to make sense of it all is to figure out paano natin alam na may tama po tayong relationship with the week and tamang relationship with creation. Question, ano ang unang araw ng linggo? Huli ka, Balbon. Pag sinabi mong Monday, saang kalendaryo kayo nakatingin? Kasi sa bawat kalendaryo, anong unang araw? Sunday. We begin with rest before we enter work. The priority is Sunday, not Monday. Pero, naging priority natin Monday. Di ba? Tuloy po natin. Talon po tayo, pag-usapan po natin ang day 7. As Barth turns the page to the 7th day, he begins, creation is finished, but the history of creation is not yet concluded. There is more to the story than the first 6 days. As he interprets the 7th day, he insists over and against earlier theologians who only included the first 6 days in their doctrines of creation, that the 7th day necessarily belongs with the broader account of the creation of the heavens and the earth. It is one story, and any omission of the 7th day necessarily leaves one's doctrine of creation incomplete and unfinished. Bakit? Tanong, what does the work of God on the 7th day create? Sabi niya, Barth insists that the finishing and the resting cannot be separate. But this doesn't mean that God continues creative activity on the 7th day. Rather, God contemplates or finishes creation on the 7th day by way of a new divine act. An act that stands distinct from God's work on the first 6 days. This new divine act confirms and confronts creation, and in this confrontation consisted in the fact that God rested from all work. By resting from work, God initiates within time and within the created order a particular relationship between God and creation. Namely, two divine characteristics that the 7th day reveals: freedom and love. Without the 7th day, there can be no freedom and there can be no love. Bakit? The first feature of God revealed by God's rest on the 7th day is freedom. Barth argues that in order for an act to be an act, it must be performed within limits. It must in fact be our act. Never-ending activity gives agency to the activity. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Sabi nga niya, tignan natin ang relationship natin sa smartphone. Technology is a perfect example. Sino po ba dito ay, tawag kasi sa school system na ito, hybrid. What is it called sa workspace? Hybrid rin ba? Or two on, one off? Hybrid rin, di ba? Hybrid. So, sino dito hybrid work relationship yan? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yung iba, araw-araw. Sino dito 5-day work week? Okay. Sino yung mga 4-day? Yung mga hybrid? Yan. Yung iba ba, mas konti? Kayo po, ma'am, sir. 5 days rin. Pero I mean, work from home yung ano. So, yung isang araw, work from home. Ano yun? Kung kailan lang kailangan, tsaka mag-o-office, mag-RTO. Yan. So, you know, it's such a strange thing kasi I started studying this concept back in 2011. It was called the 4-hour work week. When you look at production and you understand how to produce correctly, you do not need to be present in location for it to function. Now, sabi po nila, that's such a strange thing to say. Kasi kung wala ka doon, walang trabaho na nagagawa. Until the pandemic hit. Pagpasok ng pandemic, we needed to find a way to work while everything was going on. And what did we discover? Work from home also works. Ba? So now, we are in a worldwide experiment of the 4-day work week. Lahat tayo merong hybrid setting. At naintindihan natin, hybrid setting works. Bakit? Sino po dito, dahil meron pong hybrid setting, nagkaroon ng mas maraming panahon para gumawa ng iba't ibang bagay? Yan. Yung iba, wala masyado. You know, that's the reason why I kind of encourage people to go freelance and to have more than one job in these situations kasi kaya ng panahon. Diba? Because now, a lot of work is output-based. Now, ibang usapan po yan dun sa mga workstation computers na meron po silang sensor. I find that strangely cruel. Bakit? Do you know that what the problem of Jeff Bezos is? Kilala niyo si Jeff Bezos? Once upon a time, the richest man in the world, owner of Amazon. In Amazon, meron po silang konsepto na tinatawag pong time of task, TOT. Okay? Time of task. And per day, they are only allowed to have a TOT of about 4 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. 4 or 5 minutes. Now, can you imagine? Sino po dito mabilis maihi? Yan. Yung mga babae, nahihiya magtaas ng kamay, pero marami akong kilalang babaeng ganun. Ako po, ihiin po ako. So, maybe it's because my coffee drinking, water drinking, whatnot. So, palagi yung nag-excrete. So, can you imagine? Ang lalaki kasi, gaano katagal mag-CR? 30 seconds, tapos. Ang babae, kinakailangan mo ng supplies para mag-CR, para kang mag-a-adventure. Ang lalaki kasi, pagpasok ng CR lang yan. Ang babae, kinakailangan may bag. Yung bag na yan, meron dyang rations for the day, meron dyang tubig, meron dyang pickaxe kasi alam mo yun, kung ano-ano magic meron dyan eh. Ano ba nangyayari sa CR, ma'am? Mga ma'am, bakit matagal? Hindi, joke lang. Hindi, naintindihan ko, it's a very different process. Women's hygiene is a lot more difficult to deal with than men's hygiene. And I understand that. I have 5 sisters and it's very encouraged, diba? Now, can you imagine? Kung maihiin ka, 4 minutes, 5 minutes lang ang TOT mo, paano ka magsi-CR? Paano kung napasobra ka ng kain ng chichirya at nasiraan ka ng tiyan? Eh di balik-balik ka sa CR. So hindi mo magagawa. Diba? Is that natural? Napigilan mo ang tao para gawin yun? Na dapat merong kang 15 seconds lang, 30 seconds na nasa harap ng screen. Pag umalis ka for more than 30 seconds sa screen, kakaltasan na sweldo mo. Diba? So ano yun? Dadalin mo yung computer mo habang nagna-number 2 ka. Eh, paano kung Zoom meeting yun? Diba? Kawawa naman ang tao. You see, sometimes that's a problem. Because we perform in this never-ending activity, hindi ba nakakatanggal po ng dangal na? They say technology was created to make work easier. To make work easier so that we have more time doing other things. But is that true? Diba, the more technology we have, the more busy we are. The more busy we are, the less boundaries we have. And so ano ang problema? Is it technology? Or is it the one who's using technology? Kasi kung hindi natin alam paano kontrolin yung technology, di tayo yung kinokontrol ng technology. In other words, alipin tayo ng technology. Diba? We become slaves to something different. Kung ang mga Israelita, alipin sila ng mga Egyptians, alipin tayo ng devices natin. So question, alam ba natin paano bitawan yun? That's the reason why there needs to be boundaries. For freedom to happen, there needs to be boundaries. Diba? It's a mistake to think that freedom is boundless. To be free, there needs to be an end. Kaya po, maraming tao, hindi sila makatulog sa gabi. Bakit? Kasi sa screen po natin. You know, there's something very strange. Sino ba dito hirap makatulog? Ayan. Sa mga hirap makatulog, pag-pray nyo kaluluwa nyo, hindi, joke lang. Wicked no rest eh. Hindi. Try this. Before sleeping, leave all devices at least 2 hours before. Iwanan yung mga devices for 2 hours bago kayo matulog. Bakit? They have found that when the sun rises, there is light that enters into our body, into our retinas. Mata. Ang ilaw sa mata pumapasok, kaya doon nagkakaroon ng hormonal reaction through the retina. Ang problema niyan, when the sun rises, ang cortisol natin umaakyat. Because cortisol is required to wake up the body. As the sun sets, ang cortisol natin bumababa. It's a signal for the body to sleep. Now, what was the problem? We invented something known as artificial light. Diba? Light, light, light. Na, pag matutulog tayo, pinapatay. Pero, sasabihin ni Koya, mapapaantok lang ako, titiktak lang ako. Pagbukas mo ng telepono mo, makikita mo 6:00 na ng umaga, hindi ka pa rin tulog. Ibang tao sasabihin, hindi, mag-YouTube lang ako, panunod lang ako ng vlogger. Pag panood mo, mamaya 6:00 na, hindi ka pa rin tulog. Sabi ni Mami, magki-Candy Crush lang ako, 1 level lang. Mamaya 1,000 ka na, hindi ka pa rin tulog. Bakit? That light entering our retina increases our cortisol. We lost touch with natural cortisol. Kasi alipin na tayo ng devices natin. For something to be free, or for someone to be free, there must be an end to activity. Okay? God stopped creating to make space for something. What was that something? What was that something that God was freeing? It was the object of love. That's why the seventh day creates freedom and love because, tingnan po natin to. God puts the phone down, so to speak. God isn't held captive by God's work, but is free to be in relationship to it. This leads to the second divine characteristic revealed on the seventh day. The second feature of God revealed in the rest of the seventh day is love. Barth argues that love lands. Dumadapo ang pagmamahal. Rather than darting about from infatuation to infatuation, love chooses a particular subject. The reason why God refrains from further activity on the seventh day is that God has found the object of God's love and has no need of any further works. Without Sabbath, without ceasing from work, God would be a being without love, never ceasing, never finding time for any creature, never satisfied with any. And that's the reason why, if we don't understand love, then we will never be able to be free. Bakit po? Love, or we only know what love is because what we love, we spend the most time and resources for. Gusto natin malaman kung ano talaga mahal natin? Tanong, what do we spend most of our time with and most of our energy for? Kung sinabi natin trabaho, edi mahal natin ang trabaho natin. Kung sinabi natin na ang mahal natin pamilya natin, pero sa totoo lang di natin kasama, hindi natin mahal ang pamilya natin. Yan ang malaking problema ng maraming pamilya ngayon. Sino po ba dito nagkakaroon pa po ng mga time to spend meals together? Okay, yan. You know, spending meals together is one of the most beautiful things that a family can do. Sometimes, ang problema lang, we're spending meals together but none of us are present. Bakit? Yung tatay nagbabasa ng balita, yung nanay nakipagchismisan, yung anak nag-ML. So what is total time spent? Actually, wala. You're involving yourself in an activity, pero never natin binaba yung telepono eh. To be fully in love requires us to be fully present. And we know what we love kasi yun ang humahatak ng attention natin. When God stopped creating, it was because He wanted to focus His attention on us. That's why the Sabbath exists so that there may be healing. Many times, ang problema natin, we have become damaged in our understanding of God's freedom and love. Sa totoo lang, yun yung nagiging problema natin, kaya hindi na natin naintindihan ang benefit of slowing down and resting? It's because we ourselves have a bad relationship with creation. Ulitin ko, hindi ko sinasabi magpahinga kayo. Ang sinasabi ko, kung hindi kayo magpahinga, ang pahinga ang kukuha sa inyo. Right? So whenever we participate in Sabbath, we are building into this understanding of how God made us. Kaya sabi niya, looking at another book called This Thing Called Christianity, written by Jefferson Bethke, he talks about practicing Sabbath. Ano naging problema kasi natin? Paano natin sinespend ang ating rest time? Diba? When we read the New Testament, we see the purpose, heart, and mission behind Sabbath changes as the Christian church matures. Pag tumatanda tayo, nagbabago ang ating pag-unawa ng mga bagay-bagay. A lot of people think Sabbath is being quiet, praying all day, or just completely vegging out on the couch. Unpopular opinion of the day. Watching TV is not rest. Sino po dito, pag rest day, diretso Netflix na? Or diretso TV? Ano ba yung isa, yung telenovela? Broken Marriage Vow na agad. Diba? Oh. Paano hindi naging pahinga ang TV? Imagine nyo. Sino dito mahilig manood ng drama? Oh, sige, ayaw nyo drama? K-drama. Sino dito mahilig manood ng action? Horror? Suspense? Pansinin natin, lahat ng pinanood natin, hindi ba umiinit yung dugo natin? Hindi ba nasistress tayo sa pinapanood natin? So, paano naging pahinga yun? Ipasok na ng pasok yung ilaw sa mata. So, dati, akala po natin, rest is simply doing nothing. But, as we mature, we understand rest has a different meaning, and it is called active rest. We're going to get into the topic of what it looks like to rest as a follower of God, but when you look at rest, there's something called a default mode network. Alam po ba natin na ang pahinga, I'll get to that later also, does not mean walang nangyayari sa katawan natin. They have found in 1929 with a scientist named Hans Berger na kinonektahan niya ang tao ng EEG to understand how the brain is working, and meron dalawang network ang utak. One is called the task-focused network, and the other is called the default mode network. Bakit? Pag nagfo-focus daw po tayo, the task-focused network is functioning. Ang bilis ng takbo ng utak. Pero, anong nahanap nila? Noong isang beses, nakalimutan niya i-off yung EEG. Habang walang ginagawa yung tao. Yung tipong nakatunganga lang. Anong nahanap po nila? Ang mga taong nakatunganga, sino ba dito tumutunganga? Matatalino pala. Bakit? When we're zoning out and daydreaming, the default mode network becomes extremely active. Lagi natin sinasabi, masama tumunganga, masama mag-daydream. Masama mag-daydream pag nagdadrive ka, tawag doon aksidente. Masama mag-daydream pag naghihiwa ka ng sibuyas, tawag doon aksidente. Pero yung kung talon lang tayo ng talon from activity to activity, then we are never accessing that default mode network. This particular understanding na binigay sa atin ng Diyos on what it means to ruminate. Diba? Kaya po, when we understand Sabbath, it is not saying do nothing. Okay? Huwag natin isipin, to rest is to do nothing. To rest is to do something. Sabi niyo, I'd argue that doing nothing is anti-Sabbath. When you look at the Bible as a whole, two principles pop up in relation to the Sabbath. We're only going to deal with one. The first is that Sabbath can only be understood when we go back and listen to the garden echo. Balik na naman creation. The Sabbath is a rhythm deeply woven into the cosmos. It's part of creation's DNA. God didn't rest because He needed rest. Genesis 2 tells us that the rest was a celebration, an inauguration, a day filling the earth with His presence. So if God on the first Sabbath flooded the earth with His presence to both signify the completion of creation and to have a day to especially fuse Himself to that creation, then it only makes sense to celebrate in the same way. What if one day a week we fill the earth with God's presence, being creative with our wallets, time, and energy? Sacred time to, basahin natin ng malakas, serve and love. Can you imagine spending a day in service and love and how filling that can be? Kaya sabi niya, yun ang magkakamali natin. We don't understand what resting is. Resting is not doing nothing. Resting is allowing the wisdom of God to move through us. Ayan. Dito tayo. Itong libro ay tinatawag pong Peak Performance, Elevate Your Game, Avoid Burnout, and Thrive with the New Science of Success, written by Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus. Sabi niya po dito, talking about our brains at rest. Ito yung sinasabi ko, yung si Hans Berger with the EEG. Now, sabi niya, for the next 70 years, research focused on the task-positive network, or the network in the brain that is activated when we perform effortful, attention-demanding tasks. Diyan tayo nakatingin. Bakit? We base off our brain usage by the amount of tasks we can accomplish. Diba? Paano natin alam matalino ang tao? Diba? Magaling sumagot ng exam. Magaling sumagot ng mathematics. Kunyari, pag sinabing 1 plus 1, ilan yon? Naku po. 2 plus 2. 5 sabi nung isa, naku po. 4 times 4. Diba? By the amount of time and the number of answers that we can give at a given time, alam natin matalino tayo. Pero, hindi ba nag-mature na po tayo? During the 1990s, there was a study on intelligence in Harvard, and they have discovered there are at least 12 different forms of intelligence. Kaya hindi porket magaling tayo sumagot, ibig sabihin matalino na tayo. In fact, yung mga tao magaling sumagot, hindi sila necessarily matalino. Ang mga tao magaling sumagot, de joke lang. Because there's an intelligence of the body, there's an intelligence of the emotions, there's an intelligence of critical thinking and whatnot. And all of this are using different modes of the brain. Now, pag tinignan daw natin, sabi niya, it wasn't until 2001 that Marcus Rakel, MD, a neurologist at Washington University in St. Louis, re-engaged with a puzzling passive activity that Berger had discovered a lifetime ago. Using fMRI scans to look inside the brain, Rakel found that when people zone out and daydream, a particular part of the brain consistently became active. He called this the default mode network. Interestingly, as soon as Rakel's subjects started focusing again, the default mode network went black and the task-positive network became active again. Thanks to the help of more illuminating fMRI technology, unlike Berger's discovery from almost a century ago, Rakel's work prompted more scientific inquiry on the brain at rest. This body of research shows that even when it feels like our brains are quote-unquote off, a powerful system, the default mode network, is running in the background completely unnoticed by our conscious awareness. And as we're about to see, it's this system, one that is on when we are off, that is often responsible for creative insight and breakthrough. Paano natin makikita to? Reflect on the times when you're most creative. Diba? Kailan tayo pinaka-high-performing? Kailan tayo nagkakaroon ng breakthrough? At biglang bagong realization sa buhay? Is it when we're working? It's always when we're resting, di ba po? What are you doing when the answers to tough problems you've been grappling with suddenly pop into your head? Odds are you aren't trying to solve them. It's more likely that you're zoning out in the shower. If so, you'd be in the company of Woody Allen. Allen relies on the shower for creative spark. He says whenever he's at an impasse, what will help me is to go upstairs and take a shower. So I'll take off some of my clothes and make myself an English muffin or something and try to give myself a little chill so I want to get in the shower. When it comes to generating creative thoughts in the shower, Allen isn't alone, as evidenced by an entire industry of waterproof whiteboards and notebooks. Now, if not in the shower, kailan? On a run or a walk. Many esteemed philosophers, from Kierkegaard to Thoreau, held their daily walk as something sacred, the key to generating new ideas. Methinks that the moment my legs begin to move, my thoughts begin to flow, sabi ni Thoreau. Or perhaps your epiphany comes when you wake up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night or when you first emerge from a nap. The best inventors often sleep with a notebook on their nightstands. Thomas Edison was an enthusiastic proponent of power naps. Not because they helped him catch up on sleep, but because he'd awake from them with new ideas. The best performers in the world understand that rest is necessary for growth. Ang problema, are we truly free? Baka naging alipin po tayo ng mga ginagawa po natin. I remember this story about a South African safari. Na i-cross po nila ang Africa, no? At yung mga puti na pumunta doon, nakatingin sila sa relo. Diba? Bakit? Ang pumapatay sa marami ay tinatawag pong appointment. Diba? Pag may appointment tayo, kinakailangan natin makarating sa lugar at a certain time. Now, pag-isipan natin, lahat ba ng appointment natin mahalaga? Siguro. Pero sa level ng kahalagahan, mamamatay ka ba kung malate ka ng 5 minutes? Now, this is not an excuse to be late. Huwag niyo sabihin sa akin, Coach, tinanggal ako sa trabaho kasi sabi mo magpahinga ako. Gets ko. As a kid, ang trabaho mo is not to rest. You have so much time to rest. In fact, ang bata, di ba? Sabi nga, nagbibiroan kami tungkol sa charge. Narinig niyo po yung charge. Sabi nung isang kausap ko, grabe yung mga bata. Kasi may mga adults po na nagbantay at nag-check. So sabi niya, grabe yung isa. Yung tipong sabi niya, pagod na siya. Pagdating nung hapon, mamaya nakita ko, nagja-jackstone, naglalaro na doon. Sabi ko, pagod yun? Eh, di ba tayo pagpagod, hilata? Yung pagpagod, ultimo yung kukuha ka na lang ng tubig, ayaw mo na lang kumuha ng tubig kasi masakit katawan mo. Bilang bata, ang trabaho mo ay siguraduhin na meron kang kinabukasan. Diba? Pero, kinakailangan natin maintindihan, as we age, as we grow older, we need to factor in time for Sabbath. Kung hindi natin i-factor in time of Sabbath, ulitin ko, hindi ko sinasabing magpahinga kayo. Pero kung hindi kayo magpahinga, ano po? Pahinga ang kukuha sa'yo. Pag tumanda tayo, hindi na tayo ganun. The best performers in the world understand we need to leverage time. Time is spent not doing just one thing. Time is spent both on yin and yang. Kinakailangan yung isang aspeto ng panahon, ginagamit natin sa laban. Pero yung isang aspeto ng panahon, ginagamit natin to recover. And when we recover, it is not because we are tired or because we are weak, but because recovery makes us strong. Recovery and rest, Sabbath, is healing. Kinakailangan natin maintindihan yun. Ngayon, yun yung sinasabi po niya. Pag tinignan po natin, Yung South African kasi na mga puti, akala nila nagmamadali sila. Alam niyo, may kausap ako kahapon yung isa small group na hinahandle ko. Isa sa mga kapatiran natin is working sa FIVOX. At sabi nga niya yung isang beses, hindi po siya nakapunta dun sa aming small group gathering kasi po, nasa Benguet po siya para i-check yung seismic readings ng sensors. Alam niyo kailan po siya pumunta doon? Nung nagkaroon ng lindol sa Abra. Naalala niyo yon? Sino dito gising nun? Ako po, tulog na tulog po ako nun eh. Yung mga ibang tao daw, yung pag lumilindol, hindi makatulog. Yung ibang tao naman hindi makaramdam. Ako po yung hindi makaramdam. Diba? So, hindi ko maintindihan. Pero sabi nga niya grabe yung timing. Kasi actually, nung time na yon hindi pa namin alam kung paalis na kami o hindi. Pero parang nag-delay kami ng konti. Nung nag-delay kami ng konti, sabi niya, buti na lang kasi sumakto, yung trip namin, hindi pa kami nandun sa Cannon Road. Kaya nangyari, tumigil muna sila sa Baguio. Hindi sila nagmadali pa uwi. Sabi ko, na-imagine mo ba kung nagmadali ka? Baka mamaya, linilibing na kita. Diba? Kaya sabi niya, hindi schedule na nagpapatakbo. Yung mga puti, nakapahinga na sila ng konti, sabi nila dun sa mga giya nila, na mga native, tara na! Sabi ng mga itim, hindi mamaya na. Sabi ng puti, tara na! Sabi ng mga itim, hindi mamaya na. Sabi ng puti, anong mamaya na? Ako nagbabayad sa'yo eh. Pag sinabi ko tara na, tara na. Sabi nung itim, sige, ikaw, pumunta ka. Alam mo ba saan pupunta? Yung puti, napatahimik. Hindi niya alam saan pupunta eh. Sabi nung itim, hindi tayo pwede pumunta pa. Kasi, hinihintay natin yung kaluluwa makahabol sa katawan. Alam niyo, marami beses problema natin, ba't di na natin marinig ang tinig ng Diyos? Yung katawan natin, nasa kabilang kanto na yung kaluluwa natin na iwan. Maraming taong ganun, ha? Kaya, pag nagmamadali tayo, dun maraming aksidente. Pag nagmamadali tayo, dun maraming mistakes. Pag nagmamadali tayo, dun tayo nagkakaroon ng mga masasamang pangyayari. Pag hindi nagmamadali, may mga naririnig tayo eh. That's the default mode network. Shinut down natin ang task performance eh. Ang task-focused network. Tumingin tayo dun sa default mode network. Na ang default mode network, hindi sabihin wala kang ginagawa. It is taking in all the information and it collates it. Now, did you know? What is, di ba? Sabi nila ang katawan, pag nag-exercise, ang muscle, pag napunit, pag kumain ka ng protein, the amino acids go into the muscle fiber and it builds the muscle. Now, itong problema, what rebuilds the brain pag pagod na pagod? Wala kang pwedeng kainin eh. There's absolutely nothing that you can eat that makes the brain better. Do you know the one thing that can make the brain better? Sleep. Kasi daw po, ang tulog pala, ang gamit niya sa brain, para niyang kinokollect lahat ng information na pumasok and it tries to make sense out of it. Kaya, ang mga taong hindi natutulog becomes less sharp and less creative. When we learn how to rest in God, then we inevitably access the wisdom that God is trying to share. Ulitin ko, hindi ko sinasabing magpahinga kayo. Huwag niyo sabihin na tanggal kayo sa trabaho dahil sa akin, ha? Hindi. I understand. You have obligations? Give yourself a time frame. Habang may anak ka nag-aaral sa eskwela, tiis-tiis. Pero pagdating a certain point, hindi. Panahon na para sa akin ang relationship ko kasama ng Diyos. Panahon na ng relationship ko kasama ng creation. Panahon na ng relationship para sa sarili ko. Hindi, yung anak ko, nag-graduate na ng school, kinakailangan ko na sa bilan ng kotse, hindi niya kailangan ng kotse. Pagtrabahuin mo yung tao, siya naman. Di ba? Hindi niya kailangan ng bahay. Hindi, ikaw na yun. Ego mo na yun. You know something that's very hard kasi? How do we understand value? Diba? Yun yung point eh. Are we valuable because of the production that we make? Paano kung wala ka ng gamit? You see, when we think that is only production that gives us value, then we are inevitably saying, Lord, nagkamali ka eh. Hindi, kasi ang Diyos ang tingin sa atin, di ba? It is not anything that we did that brought Jesus Christ here on earth, but rather what we didn't do. God sees us for the value that we have, not for the production that we make. And whenever we look at production at iisip natin, yun lang yung nagbibigay sa atin ng sense, yun lang nagbibigay sa atin ng value sa mundo na ito, then we are inevitably saying that I'm God. Ego natin yun eh. And guess what? Ego is the enemy. Baka mamaya, hindi na tayo uwi. Ginagalit niyo ako eh. Diba? Hindi. There's a very particular word that is found in the Lord's Prayer. I'm not going to go into it deeply. But it's the word epiousios. Epiousios was translated as daily. Give us this day our daily bread. Epiousios does not mean daily. It has absolutely no meaning. It only is found once in the Bible there. And pag tinanong mo ang Griego, hindi nila masagot. It had 4 components. Either today, tomorrow, or a state of heart. Dalawang klaseng state of heart. So hindi nila maintindihan. Until you enter into the Syriac understanding, in Syriac, which is the language closest to Aramaic, the language that Jesus used, dailiness had to do with trust in God. Yung sabi ko, oh. Kasi binibigay niya dito ang sense ng, teka lang, selfish ba tayo? Kasi it had a component of gift. Number 1, the bread is a gift. It is never something you work for. Number 2, the bread is communal. Bakit? Give us this day our daily bread. Not give me my bread and not my brethren's. Diba? And 3, it is never cake. Ano yung sabihin nun? God does not give in excess. When we look at it, yung excess, yung mga extra, above and beyond yan. Ang talagang pinagkakatiwalaan natin sa Diyos, yung provision for the day. So pag pinag-isipan natin na malalim, hindi, anong issue dito? Tayo. Ang issue dito, hindi, gusto natin valuable tayo eh. Gusto natin tayo talaga yung tayo yung mga savior. Tayo ang nagliligtas ng pamilya natin, tayo nagliligtas ng marriage natin, tayo nagliligtas para masabi natin, di ako yun. Diba? Ako ang magaling. So, a relationship with our Savior, a relationship with God, tells us, Lord, minsan-minsan kaya ko bumitaw. Minsan-minsan kaya kong umasa sa'yo. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. Yung naalala natin yung kanta? Diba? Minsan nawawala na yun sa atin eh. Kaya dapat pahabulin natin ang kaluluwa natin sa katawan. Now ito, this is something that I found so interesting. Lin-Manuel Miranda, MacArthur Fellowship, Genius Grant winner, and creator of the blockbuster Broadway musical Hamilton, puts it like this. A good idea doesn't come when you're doing a million things. The good idea comes in the moment of rest. It comes in the shower. It comes when you're doodling or playing with trains with your son. It's when your mind is on the other side of things. Piece these interesting anecdotes together and a powerful theme emerges. Our most profound ideas often come from the small spaces in between otherwise deliberate thinking, when our brains are at rest. Sabbath is about healing. Rest is not about doing nothing but allowing the wisdom of God to take over. Now ito, talking about Lin-Manuel Miranda. Ako po, I'm an appreciator of Lin-Manuel Miranda. I really like his play Hamilton. I like his songs for Moana. I like his songs for Encanto. I think he's one of the most intelligent and most lyrical na mga songwriters in the whole world. Ang hirap makaintindi ng mga kanta niya. Kasi sabi nga yung mga kanta niya, they're strangely specific but relatable. Yung sobrang lapit niya sa kwento ng tao, kahit na hindi naman ikaw yung pinag-uusapan. For example, Moana. See the line where the sky meets the sea? Ano? Ako lang pala dito, fan. Di ba? See the line where the sky meets the sea? Yung ibang tao napakanta na, it calls me, knocks. Bakit? Manlalayag ka? Hindi naman, di ba? Pero, alam mo may tumatawag sa'yo doon sa malayo sabi nila, ang hirap para magsulat. Yun yung rason kung bakit parang pakiramdam ko, minsan tayo sa Pilipinas, nagkakaroon tayo ng pagmamadali because we're so task-oriented. Now, I remember, there was this conversation that I had with a lot of people na sabi ko, bakit walang masayang Tagalog song? Diba? If ever, yung mga hits natin, marami sa kanila ballads. Very, very few ang mga happy songs. Diba? And one of them said, hindi kasi coach, ang Tagalog, ang syllabic nature niya, bagay lang siya sa mga ballad, sa mga sad songs. Kasi nga, masyado siyang syllabic sa nature. Now, sabi ko, binigyan mo ko ng science, binigyan mo ko ng formula, pero I find that lazy. Bakit? Bakit madali magsulat ng ballad? Kasi lahat po tayo nasasaktan. Diba? Lahat po tayo naiiwan, hinihiwalayan, diba? Nabibigo ang mga pangtiwala, yung mga ganon. So madali siya ma-access. It takes 3 times harder to access happy memories than it is to access sad memories. And it takes 3 times more effort to allow a person to feel happy. Kaya gusto mo maging masaya, kinakailangan magtrabaho ka para sa kaligayahan. Diba? Now, ito. I just find it that sometimes we're too one-dimensional. Kunyari, pagsusulat tungkol sa mga kontrabida. Ako po kasi, wala ako masyadong karanasan sa mga kontrabida ng Pilipinas. One time, sino ba yung kalaban ni Darna na ahas? Valentina. Oh, Valentina, no? Di ba kontrabidang kilalang-kilala yun sa Alam niyo ba, na-meet ko yung artista ng Valentina, hindi ko man lang alam na siya yun. As in, no joke. Yung mga ganun, wala masyadong karanasan. But I remember nung bata po ako, yung usong-uso nung time na yon, yung Marat Clara. Naalala niyo yon? Sino nakakita, nanonood pa nun? Marat Clara ba or Mara Clara? Ha? Mara Clara, walang at. Okay. So, tapos di ba, ang artista nun si Juday tsaka si Gladys Reyes. Ngayon. Hindi ko alam paano magtutunog na hindi ako nanyuyurak ng pagkatao eh. Hindi mananalo ng award sa writing yun. Bakit? Parang minsan, di ba, pag nakikita mo, grabe karahas naman tong si Clara kay Mara. Yung minsan, wala nang rason, gagawa lang ng kasamaan para lang masabing masama siya. Di ba? Napansin niyo yun? Yung mga kontrabida natin, talagang kontrabida. Parang akala mo sobrang, 2D. Walang Now, one of the most difficult characters to write about is Superman. Bakit? Superman is too perfect. He's not relatable. Sino ang pinakamadali sulatan? Si Batman. Kasi si Batman, sobrang relatable. Ba't niya ginawa yun? Out of pain. Nawalan ako ng magulang eh. Kaya minsan nananakit ako ng tao. Kasi isipin mo, nambubugbog. Sa totoong buhay, kriminal si Batman. Di totoo lang, bakit ikaw? Pag makita ka ng tao ng bubugbog ng tao dahil pinatayin magulang niya, hero o kriminal? Bakit siya kumukonekta sa atin? Kasi, di ba, may mga pain tayo eh. And that's why Batman is easily relatable. Magaling ang pagsusulat when you know that even the kontrabida is relatable. Sabi nga nila why is it hard to write a villain? Because villainy is not a life choice. Tignan natin ang buhay natin. What if you were judged on the worst day of your life? Diba? May mga araw na hindi naman natin sinasadya pero nagiging villain tayo, kontrabida tayo eh. Yung tipong yung anak mo, Mami, Daddy, pwede ba ako lumabas? Ikaw pinagalitan ka ng boss mo. Hindi! Diba? Dito ka lang. Diba? Walang labas-labas. Diba? Sabihin natin hindi nangyari yun. Yung nag-lash out tayo sa anak natin, not because of the child, but because of something that happened outside. Na nag-lash out tayo sa partner natin, not because of the partner, but because of something that's happening elsewhere. Now, can you imagine, if we were all judged based on the worst days of our lives, then we're all villains. Lahat tayo, bar none. Sabi nga ni Jesus, let he who is blameless cast the first stone. O sino nakapagbato? Ni isa wala. Lahat tayo blameful. Yun ang naging problema ni Lin-Manuel Miranda. In 2000, I may be wrong on the date, but Lin-Manuel Miranda goes on record to say, I am writing an album, a mixtape, based on the life of a hero of mine who I feel very strongly about. Sabi niya, Alexander Hamilton, the man who embodies hip-hop. Bakit? Immigrant, through hard work and sheer tenacity, rises to the top and becomes a founding father. Now, the story of Hamilton goes that Hamilton dies in a duel against Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was another founding father and he was the villain of the story. Now, in announcement, it took him 5 years before he was able to bring out Hamilton. Bakit? Hindi niya masulat yung character ni Aaron Burr. Kasi sabi niya, ang dali magsulat at ipakitang masama siya. Pero ba't sila nag-away? Ba't sila nagbanggaan? Hindi niya masolve for 5 years. Until one day, sa sobrang pagod niya na, nag-party siya. Papunta siya sa party, naglalakad sa kalye, bigla pong merong dumating na kanta sa puso niya na hindi po niya alam saan nanggaling. So he brings out his phone and records a voice memo. And it ends up being the song of Aaron Burr. Hindi niya alam kung saan nanggaling. Now ito, pag tinanong siya, what is the greatest song that you have ever written? Sabi niya, this song. It's called Wait for It, the song of Aaron Burr in Hamilton. Ito yung kanta para maintindihan bilang tao si Aaron Burr. Kasi sabi niya, ba't sila nagbangga ni Hamilton? Si Hamilton, go, go, go. Si Aaron Burr, what ruled him was fear. Galing siya sa isang established na family. Ang problema, nung namatay yung magulang niya, hindi naman nag-iwan ng instruction sa buhay. Binigyan lang siya ng legacy. Burr ka. Hindi ka pwedeng matalo. Ang problema, may upstart, Hamilton. Si Hamilton, nothing to lose, anak ng pokpok. So siya, bira ng bira. Ito hindi makabira. Kasi takot siya na ang bawat kilos niya, baka masira yung legacy ng pamilya niya. But the way that he writes it is so beautiful. Parinig ko po sa inyo. Can you please have the song, Wait for It? Yung kanta na yon, sabi niya, bakit ba ako si Hamilton? Dapat ako na lang si Aaron Burr. Nainggit po siya. Kasi sabi ng mga tao, nung nakikinig, grabe daw, sabi, pag narinig nila yung kanta ni Aaron Burr, naiiyak sila. Sabi nila, ako yun eh. Hindi ko alam anong gagawin sa buhay. Ang alam ko lang, may rason ba't buhay pa ako. Kaya hintayin ko. Kaya sabi ko, grabe no? Ano ang rason kung bakit nakita niya kung sino si Aaron Burr? It wasn't the hard work alone. It was only when he rested that he got to know Burr. Because not only is Sabbath about healing, it is also about being. To enter into Sabbath is to understand how God sees us. This book that I'll be reading from is called Keeping the Sabbath Holy. As in buo. Written by Marva J. Don, who is a Canadian theologian. Sabi niya, there are 4 aspects of keeping the Sabbath holy. Ceasing, resting, embracing, and feasting. Now, tignan natin yung isang chapter po. Sabi niya, one of the ugliest things about our culture is that we usually assess a person's worth on the basis of his or her productivity and accomplishments. One of the first questions we ask when meeting a stranger is, what do you do? As if the data in the person's response will help us really know who he or she is. Most of our inferiority complexes derive from the fact that we haven't done anything we wish to do or that we haven't been as productive as someone else. No matter who we are, we can always find someone who has accomplished more than we have, so we are doomed always to feel second-rate. But sabi niya, hindi ganyan yung tingin ng Diyos sa atin. Kaya to look at this, let's look at Isaiah chapter 43. Sabi niya dito, one of my favorite passages on this topic includes these words of God to Israel. But now, this is what the Lord says. He who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Since you are precious and honored in my sight, and because I love you. Within the context of Yahweh's promises to rescue His people from their captivity and bring the exiles back to their home, this passage focuses on God's overt declarations of what makes His people worthy. Over and over, the text insists that Yahweh is the one who makes us valuable. He is the one who created, formed, redeemed, called His people by name, made them His, was with them, protected them, saved them, and made them precious and honored in His sight. The last phrase of this passage is absolutely incredible. The verb that we translate love is usually used to denote the love of a husband for his wife. With that kind of personal, intimate love, God loves the sinful people of Israel. Hindi tayo yung rason kung ba't may value. We need to see the value of humanity. It's because God is the one who made us. Agree ako sobra kay Leonard Sweet. Sabi ni Leonard Sweet, gusto natin i-solve ang problema ng mundo. It all comes from seeing the Christ in another person. Pag alam mo na anak ng Diyos yung katabi mo, hindi mo kaya gawan ng kasamaan yan eh. Kasi alam mo may nangyayari rin dyan sa buhay ng tao na yan. Na bagamat na baka ngayon may problema siya, hindi siya masyado mabuting tao, pero may proseso na pinapadaan ng Diyos dyan. Kaya sabi niya, God certainly didn't choose Israel because of their accomplishments or their productivity. They were the least among the people of the ancient Near East. They were rebellious and self-centered. They constantly failed to keep up their end of the covenant relationship with Yahweh. So God's love for them is related not to what they do, but to His character as the eternal I am. This is what we celebrate on the Sabbath. We join the generation of believers going all the way back to God's people, the Jews who set aside a day to remember that we are precious and honored in God's sight and loved, profoundly loved, not because of what we produce. To celebrate God's love on our Sabbaths also transforms us so that we can more deeply value others in the same way. Hamilton is Hamilton, the Broadway show Hamilton, because Lin-Manuel Miranda knew how to rest. Nung nanatili siya, nakita niya, ni tao rin pala si Aaron Burr. Si Aaron Burr, parang ako rin lang pala siya. Nakita niya yung pagkatao niya, kahit nung yung paborito ni Manuel Miranda was Hamilton, not Burr. And it came to a point na ultimo gusto po niya maging si Burr, not Hamilton anymore. Ganon yan, natutunang mahalin ang character ni Burr. It was only when he remained. So, healing, but also being. So, what should we do? Ano ang Sabbath for us? Okay? How much should we spend on Sabbath? Ang sabi ng science, how much rest is adequate? Anong sabi? Ilan po? 42%. That is the percentage of time your body and brain need you to spend resting. On a day, for 24 hours, that's 10 hours. Grabe, no? 10 hours of the day needs to be spent resting. Sasabihin ng mga tao, Coach, grabe naman, kabatugan yung tao na yan. Na-imagine nyo ba, magpapahinga sa bawat araw 10 hours? Sana all, di ba, birthday, eredero yung datingan eh. Ano yun? But, ulitin ko, hindi ko sinasabi magpahinga ka. Ang sinasabi ko, kung hindi ka magpahinga, ang pahinga ang kukuha sa'yo. So, paano natin gagawin yan? Sabi nga niya, hindi kinakailangan sa isang araw. Pwedeng sa isang linggo, pwede sa isang buwan. Pwede over the course of one project. We're going through something stressful. Change your time signature. Understand differently. 3 months ang project mo, di dapat nakapasok sa 3 months yung 42%. Hindi siya kinakailangan araw-araw. Diba? Kinakailangan natin manalo pa rin. Pero, kinakailangan natin ipasok ang pahinga. Now, what does that look like? What does 42% rest look like? Hindi siya lahat tulog, ah. Tignan nyo to. Yan ang itsura ng 42%. Kung meron tayong 24 hours in a day, sabi niya, yan, di ba? Sleep, connection, exercise, food, wild card. Ano yung sabihin yan? 8 hours should be spent in sleep opportunity. Not sleep, but sleep opportunity. Bakit? Kumbaga, as a planner, as someone who fixes their day, block off 8 hours for sleep. Okay? Opportunity lang. Give ourselves that chance. Sa mga taong hirap makatulog, baka 2 hours kinakailangan bago nun, maghanda na tayo na walang screen, walang blue light, etc., etc. 20 to 30 minutes of stress-reducing conversation with your partner or other trusted loved one. Okay? Dapat araw-araw may kausap tayong nagmamahal sa atin. 30 minutes of physical activity, whether with people or alone, you do it with the explicit mindset of gear switching, feels purging, rest getting freedom. Physical activity counts as rest, partly because it improves the quality of your sleep, and partly because it completes the stress response cycle, transitioning your body out of stress state and into a resting state. Okay? 8 hours tulog, 30 minutes usap, 30 minutes exercise. Ngayon, 30 minutes of paying attention to food. Buong araw na yon. Hindi ibig sabihin 30 minutes per meal. Okay? So, paying attention to food means mindful eating. Either ikaw naghahanda ng pagkain mo, or pag kumakain, wala kang ibang ginagawa. Bakit? Minsan, para po tayong madaga, pag kumain, tuloy-tuloy lang yung bibig. Walang tigil. Kaya hindi na natin natitikman, hindi na natin nalalasaan, hindi tuloy nagpaparasympathetic yung katawan natin. Kaya po, maraming tao, di ba, hindi natutunawan. Kasi did you know that in a state of stress, all blood goes away from the gut to go into your extremities. Your gut function stops. When you're in a restful state, dyan nagdadigest yung tiyan. Kaya hindi pwedeng nagmamadali. And finally, a 30-minute wild card, depending on your needs. For some people, this will be extra physical activity because they need that much to feel good. For others, preparation for sleep. For still others, social playtime. And for others, this is just a breath. Time for your soul to catch up with your body. Okay? Now, as followers of God, how do we do this? The number one form of rest and Sabbath that we must do is sleep. Okay? Sleep. Bakit? Hindi matatalo ang tulog pagdating sa pahinga. Number two, beautying. What does beautying mean? Hindi nagpapa-beauty. Okay? It is basking in the beauty of God's creation. There's something strange with how God made us. The more in touch we are with nature, the better we feel. That's why, ang mga taong nakatira sa condo, anong recommendation? Dapat, kung condo ka nakatira, below 8 floors ka lang. Kasi kung 8 floors and below, hindi umaakit ang cortisol. Paano kung nakatira ka sa 60th floor? Suko na sa buhay. Hindi. What they have found is if you tend a garden, yung cortisol bumababa. Being able to bask in God's creation, God's beauty, heals us. Kaya, ang recommendation ko dito, either one, maging plantito or plantita ka, or two, schedule nature walks. Kung may park kayo, lakad. Basta maraming berde. Kung nasa tabing dagat ka, lakad. Basta nasa nature. Kung wala po, nakatira sa syudad, baka once a month gusto nyo makit ng prayer mountain. Diba? I-schedule nyo na mag-spend ng time sa nature. Right? Now, number 3, the third version of rest is villaging. Okay? It's very important to spend time with people who want you to thrive. Now, ano nahanap po nila? Happy hour is not happy. Bakit? Hindi dapat mag-happy hour. Bakit? Because happy hour is spent with work colleagues. You should not go out with your work colleagues. Bakit? Anong pag-uusapan nyo? Siyempre, yuyurakan yung boss nyo. Pag-uusapan nyo yung mga nangyari. Ano ba naman to? Sige naman, baho ng kilikili, yung mga ganun, kung ano-ano na. Kinain niya yogurt ko, yung mga ganun. Hindi. The villaging needs to uplift and upgrade. So that has to come from your friends, real friends, family, or your church. These are the things that uplift and upgrade. We need to have villaging time. And the fourth, wala na po tayong oras to discuss it further, but the fourth and best form of rest is prayer. When we pray, and I don't mean petition, walang hinihingi. I don't mean intercession, walang pinagdadasal. But I mean communion. Ito yung panahon kung saan nananatili lang tayo sa presensya ng Diyos. Walang hinihingi. We are just simply carving out time with God. That can be done in conjunction with our beautying. That can be done in our times of breathing. Basta ang mahalaga, we learn how to carve out time with our Creator. Prayer is a very, very strong mechanism. Now, every 2 weeks, sa Crossroad, we have something called Deep Mornings, which is a morning watch at 6 a.m. on every other Saturday. Nagkakaroon po ng prayer meeting where there's a short exhortation, singing of songs, prayer, and then afterwards, they eat breakfast together. That is one of the beautiful ways we can rest. Pasok dyan ng villaging, pasok dyan ng prayer. Now, maybe you'd want to schedule that. Wala akong time, coach. Make time. Kung hindi ka marunong magpahinga, ang pahinga ang kukuha sa'yo. Hindi ko masabi, pero ilang beses tayo nagkasakit pagkatapos ng trabaho. Or hindi natin natapos yung trabaho kasi talon tayo from stress to stress to stress. Kinailangan tayo itakbo sa ospital, nahimatay tayo, nag-collapse, may sakit na. Hindi ba yan ang nangyayari pag hindi tayo marunong gumawa ng panahon? The busier we are, the more we need Sabbath. Carve out Sabbath. Create a time for Sabbath. Because that is where growth happens. Leonard Sweet, in his book, Bad Habits of Jesus, talks about every time that Jesus disappears in prayer. It is always after rest that a miracle happens. It is always after rest that a miracle happens. If you look at Mark chapter 6, doon po, binigyan po ng trabaho ni Jesus ang mga disipulo. Sabi niya, umikot-ikot kayo, ibahagi niyo ang magandang balita. Pagbalik ng mga disipulo, nag-report sila kay Jesus. Anong unang sinabi ni Jesus sa kanila? Halik kayo, magpahinga muna kayo. Nung sinabi niya magpahinga sila, ano nangyari after? Jesus ends up feeding the 5,000. Moments of rest precede miracles. Sabbath is necessary to heal our relationship with God and ourselves and our community. And Sabbath is important because it reminds us of who we are. We're not human doings, we're human beings. Be in the presence of God. Today is Communion Sunday. As we come into a time of prayer, let's ask God for time. Minsan nakakalimot tayo dahil masyado tayong busy. Hindi masama po yun. Hindi ibig sabihin ng rest na pinaprioritize natin ng rest ay sabihin hindi na tayo magtatrabaho. But rather we are recognizing that without God, life is incomplete. Hindi natin mabubuo ang kwento ng ating buhay kung hindi natin inintindi ang mga bagay ng magpasawalang hanggan. And God is teaching us what it means in Matthew chapter 11. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. As we come into a time of prayer, let's recommit to spending time with God. Let's all stand as we prepare for communion.
feast at the table of the Lord. I will feast at the table of the Lord. I won't harm.